we're now recording. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself. So I'm going to do the first half of this session, take you through a kind of introduction to performance management, a very kind of high level kind of introduction in terms of a kind of a training course. But it's very, very high level, very, very basic, but just kind of talks about some of the basics, the key points of performance management. And then I'll hand over to Anna, and she's going to speak more about the work that we do as an organisation to support local authorities in managing their performance. So if I can have the next slide, please. Okay, so if any of you were wondering why the session was called Measuring the Pig, it's because of this phrase here, this quote. I don't know who it's attributed to, and actually I think there are many varieties of this really, but this is how it was put to me. So I came across this saying, gosh, a few years ago now in a meeting, and the person who kind of like said it to me was using it as a way of suggesting that perhaps measuring performance using performance data isn't really that useful and might in fact be seen as a distraction. And I reflected on that quite a lot actually. And it's true, of course, that simply measuring a pig, or doesn't make it grow, doesn't replace action or elicit improvement all by itself. However, if we don't monitor what we're doing, and in particular the impact of our actions, if we don't measure our pig, then how do we know whether what we're doing is having the desired effect? So if we take my imaginary pig, for instance, and please forgive me, this is one I drew earlier, not a real pig. So here's one I drew earlier. So if my aim is to grow the pig, how do I know whether what I'm doing and what I'm feeding it, for instance, is having the desired effect? And even if in this instance you might argue, well, I can see that my pig is growing, how do I know whether it's healthy and appropriate growth? Is it gaining weight too quickly or not quickly enough? Is it gaining too much weight? Now, I'm not going to labour the pig analogy beyond this point, but just wanted it to use it as a kind of way of explaining that measuring performance allows us, as I've said, to understand whether we're doing what we're meant to be doing and that we're achieving what we set out to achieve. And monitoring your performance on a regular basis can also allow us to change what we're doing if it isn't delivering the desired results. So just as by way of an introduction, this is just to say that measuring performance is in fact vital to effective service delivery and pig rearing. So just a very kind of quick introduction to what performance management is. As it says on the screen, quite simply, or on a very high level basis, performance management is about using performance data to ensure local needs are being met and public money is being spent wisely. In practice, however, it's a little bit more than that. We've got that little diagram on the side there of this kind of plan, do, review, ongoing cycle, and it kind of encapsulates that whole process. And it's a process that involves knowing lots of stuff, really. It's a process that involves knowing what needs to be done and what success looks like, which are your objectives. It's about knowing how well you're delivering or achieving those objectives. And it's about knowing how well you're performing and where you may need to change. And crucially for performance management, it's about acting on that knowledge to ensure that you continue to meet, as we said before, local needs and spending public money wisely. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. So how do we do performance management? Well, that's what today's session is all about. But we do only have 20 minutes. Or such for my part of this. So I'm going to take as I've said before, I'm going to take quite a high level overview and focus on 4 key steps. But before we look at those, I wanted to touch on the fundamental building blocks of effective performance management, and that is, as you can see on the screen, people and data. So people at the heart of everything we do, both what you do and what we do, not just in terms of citizens, which we will talk about, but also in terms of employees. Employees are an organisation's greatest asset and play a really key role in performance management. For instance, your employees or colleagues have a unique perspective into both their service and those that use it. And it's really valuable, therefore, to involve them in all aspects of performance management, from agreeing the objectives through to reviewing the data and then agreeing what needs to happen or what needs to change. And what's more, it's our employees or colleagues who are responsible, obviously, for delivering those services, and by association, therefore, your objectives. So by doing with, not to, We can help ensure that everyone is working towards the same objectives and that everyone understands how they contribute to the delivery of those objectives, and that everyone feels a kind of shared sense of ownership and responsibility for the objectives and are invested in achieving them. And obviously, when we think about data, data is the currency of knowledge. It's how we understand the world around us. It's how we understand the needs of our citizens and how we might be able to deliver services to help meet those needs. It's also, as previously suggested, that it's how we understand the extent to which we are meeting those needs. And so that's kind of going to be our focus for today, is looking obviously from a data point of view at how that and performance management work. So let's look at some practicalities. So as I've said, we've got 40 steps that we're going to touch on. It's a very, very high level. I keep wanting to say this to performance management. So step one we've set out here is about setting objectives, and that's at the heart of it. It's about being clear on what it is that you want to achieve. What is it that you're working towards? What you want to deliver? I'm using the term objectives throughout the course, throughout this presentation, but you may be more familiar with priorities or outcomes. Essentially, what we're talking about is what is it that we want to achieve? What does success look like? And this is a question that needs to be thought out of all levels of the organisation. And the other thing to be mindful of is that, you know, there are there's no set limit on how many objectives you might have, either as an organisation or as a service, but obviously you do need to make sure that you've kind of got a manageable number. So those are just two things to bear in mind. But what we've got on the screen there are a couple of things to consider in a bit more detail. So firstly, we need to make sure that our objectives are meaningful. This means we need to reflect the needs of our communities, which is a big concept for what is quite a small bullet point on the screen. But if we really do want to be delivering meaningful services, then we need to have meaningful objectives. And data is vital to this. Not just your traditional data, the facts about our population, but also the views of the communities and your service users. What do they want? What would they find useful? What would help them? That data is vital to being able to set really meaningful objectives. Your objectives also have to be realistic. They need to focus on something that you can actually have an impact on, that is within your gift to influence. For instance, as a local authority, you may choose not to focus on reducing childhood obesity, as you alone cannot drive improvement in that area as a single organisation. That might be something better suited to a public service board, for instance. But you may choose to focus on providing healthy meals in schools. Your objectives also need to be realistic in terms of resources. So do you actually have the necessary resources to dedicate to this objective? Is it a priority? That doesn't mean only focus on what you can deliver, because obviously challenge is good, but don't set yourself up for failure. Maybe you aim for the moon this year and the stars next year. So we've also got to consider whether there are organisational corporate objectives. So for instance, if you're working in a service area, it's good practice to align your objectives to your organisational corporate objectives. This helps ensure that the organisation is working towards the same goal and that funds are being channeled into priority areas. And then lastly, for today, are there any other strategies that you should be aware of? So that, you know, you may need to take account of other strategies that impact on you and your service, or that require things from your service, such as, for example, the National Recycling Targets, or the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So it's being mindful of these other strategies and understanding how they may impact on what your objectives are. Next slide, please. Yeah. So then step 2. It's about measuring your performance. And this is about, as it says on the screen, making sure that we understand the extent to which you're achieving your objectives, and knowing what kind of data we need in order to do that. Again, there are some things to consider when you're looking at this. There are 3 key main types of performance data, and each provides part of the picture that you need in order to truly understand your performance. So, for instance, we have performance indicators or measures. We all are familiar with these. And performance indicators allow us to measure and monitor performance against objectives. They're very kind of metric based and very kind of clear relationship back to your objectives. We also have resident, we've called it satisfaction data here. Really, I suspect we should really say it's more like resident feedback data, resident information, because satisfaction is a specific aspect of that and isn't the broadest notion of it. But citizen feedback allows us to understand how the clients or customers or service users, communities feel about the services we're providing. What is the impact that it's having on them? And then another one that we tend to focus on is value for money, which is basically about allowing us to understand the efficiency of a service. What are we delivering for what we're spending? As it says on the screen, we would never recommend anybody rely on a single piece or type of performance data. We really need to find that balance. So, you know, you would be looking at bringing in all of those types of performance data, and you might want to be focusing on many different kind of different measures as well. You know, you need to kind of have much broader range than just kind of saying, right, this is my one indicator and this is how I'm going to measure the performance. When talking about performance data, then there are also two things to consider. It needs to be relevant, obviously, in that it needs to help you understand progress towards your objective. And the other thing to bear in mind is that it needs to be comparable, or not every piece of performance data will need to be comparable, but if it is comparable, then it adds that extra kind of benefit, as we'll see on the next slide. And the next slide, please. Thank you. So step 3 is about understanding your performance. That's about analysing, reviewing the data to understand how you're performing, what appears to be working well, and where might you need to change. So it's this about what is the data telling you about your performance. So again, things to consider. We talked previously about needing a balanced picture and not focusing on one type or level of data. It's also really vital to consider performance in context. And what we mean by that is to look at, include, use data alongside your performance data, your traditional performance data. It's about using data that allows you to understand not just the what, but the how and the why. Allows you to kind of understand more about your performance than just what your performance is. Secondly, comparison. As I said previously, comparison is really key to kind of the analysis and understanding of your performance. So being able to compare with others will allow you to get a better understanding or perspective of your performance. By understanding how you compare to others, you'll understand more about your own performance. Comparing with others can also help you identify specific areas of learning and opportunity. And it can empower you to have conversations with other local authorities, especially those that appear to be performing better than you. You can start to have those conversations about to understand, you know, what policies and procedures are in place that might allow somebody to be performing in a better way than you. Comparing with others can also help you validate assumptions. You know, you might anecdotally believe that your performance is in some way, you know, as it might be, you know, are you the best? But actually being able to see how you compare to others will really allow you to kind of understand how you compare to others rather than assuming. Two more, it can help you prioritise improvement opportunities. So knowing how you compare might help you understand where you want to focus your efforts in terms of what you're delivering. So you know, you may want to focus on areas where you're not performing as well as others potentially. And comparing with others will also help you set performance expectations. You know, it'll allow you to understand what might be possible. You know, so that might say, right, we were going to aim for this, but actually somebody who's a similar authority to us is achieving something, you know, is achieving more. So actually, if that's possible, maybe we want to aim for higher, for instance. And then lastly, when you're looking at understanding your performance, it's around kind of visualizing the data. So visualizing and presenting the data in specific ways can be a really good way of helping you understand how you're performing as well. So for instance, if we have the next slides, you know, you can look at how you perform over time. So for a specific indicator, for a specific piece of performance data, how has your performance changed over time? Equally, you can look to compare with others. So how are you comparing against all the Welsh authorities, for instance? And you can do that by a bar chart, for instance, or by a map, as you can see on the screen. There are many different ways in which you can do comparisons. I keep repeating myself, this is very much a high level kind of spotlight into some of the key things to think about. There are many ways of doing comparisons. You know, you might not want to focus on everybody across Wales. You might want to focus on the authorities who are more similar to you, whether that's within inside Wales or externally outside of Wales, you know, data allowing. Many disadvantages and advantages of each of these, and actually, as with everything, it's more about kind of getting a balanced understanding from maybe a variety of the comparison techniques, because again, no one piece of information is going to give you the full picture. So if we can have the next thing, thank you very much. And then finally, step 4, that we've looked very quickly about how performance management involves knowing what you're focusing on and what you want to achieve. We've looked at the role of performance data, and we've looked at how you can analyse and review the data in order to make sure you understand your progress or performance. But now what? What do we do with that information? How do you move from measurement to management? So you can do this by using the knowledge you've gained in that scenario in 3 important ways. Number 1, to take account. So we've talked about how we use data to understand how we're performing and how that compares. So, and that is the extent to which we're meeting our objectives. We then use that information to decide how we move forward. For example, do we need to adapt what we're doing if it's not actually having the desired impact? It's not actually, you know, helping us achieve our objectives to the extent that it would. Or how we're doing it, you know, like I've said previously, when we take account of our information, when we look at the information and are able to understand not just the what, but the why and the how, that gives us the intelligence to be able to make sure that we adapt and change and actually are acting in a way that does help us deliver our objectives. Taking account of performance regularly also allows us to identify and address, which is key, problematic performance, should we say, which might include things like simply doing what needs to be done in order to show an improvement, rather than what actually might benefit citizens. So it's a really key aspect of performance management is taking account of the data and using it to change what you're doing, adapt what you're doing, whatever it may be. The second way in which we use it is to give account. And this is about telling other people, particularly communities, about how you're performing. And it's a key aspect of performance management, and this includes telling them about what bad performance might look like. Being open and honest about your performance can help you build trust in your communities and might encourage residents to engage with you more. And obviously their feedback is vital in helping you understand what the needs are in the community and how they might be met. So I think that two-way kind of conversation can be really valuable. And lastly, thirdly, it's about being held to account. And this follows really on from that second point. So in giving account of your performance, you're allowing your communities to hold you to account. That allows them to judge and understand how well you're doing. And like I say, maybe it'll foster those conversations that allows them to suggest improvements or to congratulate you. We shouldn't always assume that it's going to be a negative picture that you're painting. I'm sure it's not. So really, in a nutshell, those are the kind of ways in which you would use the information, how we move from measurement to management. And then I believe there is only one slide left from me, and this is all about putting theory into practice. So this is just about trying to nail down some of those key takeaway messages that we'd like you to kind of leave with today. Hopefully, in what I've presented to you, you can see that performance management is a powerful tool for helping to drive real improvement and for helping to ensure that we are delivering services that meet the needs of our communities. However, it must be done properly. And what that means is it must be done properly, because poorly designed performance management or poorly executed performance management can have some perverse incentives. We talked about one on the previous slide, but for instance, you know, it can encourage defensive behaviour It can lead to an obsession with being above average on every measure or of hitting targets, regardless of an intended outcomes. And crucially, if not done properly, we can start to look at numbers as just that, as just numbers, without appreciating that actually there are real people behind these numbers, and that these numbers are actually reflecting or impacting on real people's lives. So it is really important that we approach performance management with the right mindset. And so, for instance, as the first bullet point there says, it's about making sure that our arrangements foster the spirit of shared learning, of open-mindedness, and that really allows effective performance management to thrive. In a similar way, it's about making sure that the process is able to be flexible and dynamic, that your process is able to adapt to changing needs. It's a process that allows staff to innovate. That isn't so that, you know, when we say, right, we want to be very clear about what we want to achieve, it allows staff the space to say, actually, maybe we should try X, or maybe we could try Y. And it's one that accepts that things may not always go as planned, and that we may have to change course. And that's absolutely fine as well. And like I say, if we're doing this kind of monitoring on a regular basis, then we can respond quickly, we can adapt quickly, and we're not going too far down the wrong path before we change our ways. On a more practical note, effective performance management is underpinned by very clear objectives. And that is very much about what is it that we want to achieve, not how. The how is separate, the how it comes next. But if we have very, very clear objectives, it allows people to really answer that question about how are we going to achieve that then. So objectives are clear. You need to make sure you've got the right data, that you're looking at the right data. It can be tempting to focus on data that's easily measurable, easily collectible, but it may not always be the best data. So it is about making sure that you've got the right data to help you understand progress towards those objectives. And then obviously it's about making sure you understand the data. You know, it's all well and good having it, but do you know what it means? Can you see what it's telling you? And of course, underpinning the whole kind of performance management process approach, it's about making sure you do actually use the data. You know, it's all well and good having it, but unless you actually use it to understand what's going on and then respond accordingly, then there's no point having it in the first place. So that is a very quick whistle-stop tour of performance management, a very high-level basic introduction. We are considering developing this, but a lot of developing this into a much more expansive training course around performance management. So obviously I'm going to hand over to Anna very soon. But in the meantime, we'd love some feedback on whether you think that that would be useful as a much more kind of in-depth training course. And if you've got any specific suggestions or comments on the content that you think would be useful in helping us develop the training course, then please provide those through the chat, as well as any questions you might have. Please provide that through the chat, because that would be really valuable for us. So in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Anna, and she's going to talk about some of the work that we're doing in this space to help local authorities with their management arrangement. Anna, it's over to you.
Lovely, thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anna Harris, and I'm the Insight and Engagement Manager here at Data Cymru. First, today, I wanted to talk to you a bit about the journey that we've been on here in Wales with regards to performance management. So we, Data Cymru, have worked closely with local government over the last 20 years to support you in delivering your performance management arrangements. I'm sure some of you who are on the call today have been around long enough to remember the NOPIs, which were introduced in 2002 as a means of measuring the performance of councils in exercising their functions. The NSIs and CSIs followed later by the PAMs and SIDs, built on these foundations. Both the NSIs and PAMs focused on a small number of key indicators across a range of services. The CSIs and later the SIDs were broader sets of supporting data intended to provide context. More recently, the self-assessment performance data set has been developed, which is a much broader set of data again. So why the move away from a specific set of prescribed measures? Well, in short, it's because of the local government and Elections Act, which was introduced in 2021. It replaced the improvement duty set out in the local government measure from 2009, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's designed to be more streamlined and flexible, allowing authorities to be more proactive, inquisitive and innovative in how they monitor their performance. The Act requires local authorities to keep under review the extent to which it is meeting 3 performance requirements, and they are performance, resources and governance. It goes on to say that performance should be monitored via self-assessment and that this assessment should be organisational rather than an assessment of individual services. Each council is free to determine its own approach to self-assessment, but it should be evidence-based, using a range of quantitative and qualitative data. It should be focused on outcomes, what has been achieved rather than the process, and ask honest questions about the impact of the council's actions on people's lives and experiences. While there is no requirement in the Act for councils to compare their performance, we and the WLGA believe that understanding how a council's performance compares to other councils is a fundamental part of effective performance management arrangements. Our discussions with council echo this too. So in response, we have developed the self-assessment performance dataset. So the self-assessment performance dataset, which we lovingly call SAPD, is designed to be a resource for Welsh local authorities. Local authorities can choose which data in the SAPD is relevant for their self-assessment, rather than having to comply with a prescribed set of measures. We've worked with heads of policy, colleagues and performance colleagues to identify, source and share data that helps councils understand at a strategic level how they are performing against the performance requirements and how this performance compares to other councils. The dataset is framed around a list of themes which can be linked back to the 3 performance requirements. Under each theme is a broader range of data than in previous performance frameworks to allow users to interrogate and better understand their performance. For instance, as well as more traditional outcome-related data, which we would call measures, we have included context data, resource data, and other quality measures. Data has been standardised to allow for meaningful comparisons across Wales. We recognise that there will be instances where having a high-level overview or a snapshot of performance will be useful. So for this reason, we are proposing that the thematic data will be made up of 2 layers. The snapshot data has been identified to give users a high-level overview of performance within each theme. The supporting data is self-explanatory and does exactly what it says on the tin. It supports the snapshot data. So we've developed a corporate performance data network to inform and support the development of the self-assessment performance dataset. Since its inception and based on feedback from local authorities, we have widened the remit of the network to include broader performance issues. So, looking forward, the SAPD only includes publicly available data at present. In addition to the data that already exists, our intention is to expand the dataset further. This includes identifying any gaps in the data, sourcing comparable data from outside Wales, where that's possible, sourcing data more frequently or at lower geographical areas, and also to consider emerging priorities from our ongoing liaison with the Corporate Performance Data Network. I'm going to talk a bit more broadly about benchmarking on the next slide, but in terms of the SAPD, we're currently working with various networks to develop data for asset management, planning, and also highways assets. The first phase of this work has been about bringing together relevant data from a variety of sources into one place to improve accessibility and ease of use. For us, developing key insights to support this data set is integral to the support that we provide. With that in mind, we will be looking to develop performance profiles for each council that will allow users to visualise and interact with the data. We also plan to align the SAPD with the wellbeing goals. Any decisions regarding the insights we develop will be made in collaboration with the Corporate Performance Data Network. And then I mentioned I was going to talk a bit more broadly about benchmarking. So put simply, benchmarking is the process of measuring the performance of services and processes of organisations to identify good practice and learn from each other. The goal of benchmarking is to identify opportunities for improvement by comparing your performance against others. We already work across lots of local authority services to provide benchmarking activity support. This includes working with local authorities and other stakeholders to develop clearly defined data that is relevant, collectible and timely. Our benchmarking support includes data development, which involves supporting networks to identify their objectives, agree what data will allow them to monitor progress, and help ensure requirements are clearly defined, which will then help to ensure that the data is meaningful and comparable. Collection tool development with inbuilt validation where appropriate to ensure data accuracy and consistency, the management of the collection activity to ensure good response rates and completeness. It's really important to get as full a picture as you can. Data validation and governance to ensure data is accurate and that it makes sense and that is stored appropriately. Data accessibility and providing data in usable, intelligent formats, which helps us to ensure that data is easy to access and easy to use. Data analysis to add value by generating insights centrally for the benefit of all. You know, for me, one of the most important parts of benchmarking, which is the evaluation and the feedback. You know, so these are essential components to benchmarking. We meet with local authorities regularly to facilitate discussions to allow authorities to learn from each other. We facilitate benchmarking activity across a range of local authority services, and we work with a number of national networks. This includes public and school transport, road safety, engineering services, planning, workforce and HR, waste services, youth services, and we also do a quarterly baseline collection which relates to foster and residential placement information across Wales. I'm sure that I've probably missed a few, but it gives you an idea of the scope of our benchmarking work. One glaring omission on my part from the services I just mentioned is the SAPD tool itself, which is very much a benchmarking resource for local authorities to use. So thank you for your time today. I will hand back to Suzanne, who will talk a bit more about the support we provide to build capacity and develop skills. Suzanne?
Very much. And the next slide. So yeah, this slide's been added in, not because it's necessarily specifically relevant to performance management per se, but as you'll obviously hear from Anna's slides there, a lot of the work we do is about getting the data, putting it in front of you and trying to help you analyse and understand the data. But it's all well and good having access to the data and the insights if we aren't able to actually then understand what the information is telling us, or don't have the kind of skills or confidence to understand or to interact with the data. So one of the kind of key things that we as an organisation do, one of the key services we provide, is around capacity building, developing skills, providing training. So I just wanted to list a few examples here of the types of courses we've got, so that if you're in a situation where you want to do more of what we've talked about today, but don't necessarily think that you're there yet, then we have got some courses that might help. And obviously, as I said at the beginning, we're also we're considering developing what you've heard today into a much more extensive kind of how to do performance management course. So the first one you may well be aware of, and what I will do is when we send these slides out, I will make sure that there are links in this slide, so that if I don't tell you enough about what these things are, you can go ahead after the session and have a look on our website for more info. But we have our Data Basic Cymru training programme. which is about trying to impart knowledge on the fundamentals around using data, and the whole intention of that training package is that it builds confidence. So, you know, it teaches people some of the skills that you need to do data, but with a view to saying, so look, it's not as difficult as it might be. Here, have some confidence. Let's try and have some confidence. So that's well worth a look. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail today because I'm conscious of allowing you all time to ask any questions. We also then run some specific training courses on some specific kind of aspects of data. The examples, again, the list on the screen. Perhaps most interestingly is our Data 101 and our Understanding and Using Performance Data courses. Those are generally aimed at members. They're written from a new members perspective about, and they're very high level, very basic in approach, in the sense of they're introductory. So Data 101 talks about what is data, why is it important, and how some of the tricks and tips you need in order to be able to make sure you understand what you're looking at when you are presented or sourcing data. And then the Understanding and Using Performance Data course builds on that and touches on some of the stuff I've covered today, but what is performance data and what are the other aspects of kind of analysis that you need to consider when you're looking at performance data, and again, how do you use data in order to help your performance. So aligned to what I've said today, but doesn't cover all of it. But if you're interested in any of these courses, again, I'll give you the links. You can go and look on our website. And then, of course, we've got our fortnightly webinars. That, again, is about kind of introducing new concepts or showcasing things that are happening with data. You're obviously all at one today, so well done. And we run them fortnightly generally, so keep up to date with those, and hopefully you'll find more that can be of use. So I think that's the end of our actual slides, and now I think it's just that, yes, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And I'm hoping you've had questions. If you have got questions, if you can, as I say, submit them in the chat using the little speech bubble, then we'd be more than happy to take them. Equally, if you'd rather kind of have a chat to us after today's session in a bit more detail, then please feel free to get in contact with us. You've got the inquiries email address on the screen there. You can drop that a line and it'll reach us, or you can come to Anna or I direct if you've got our details. I'm going to sit here awkwardly until somebody asks a question. Wow, everybody inside. Unless there's a problem with people using the chat function, we've not had that before. Oh, I was just about, thank you, Dad. We can always rely on Dad to come through with the question. I was just about to say, right, that's it. Oh, so it's about how you can access the training. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. It's open to any organisations really, the training that we offer. So I due a conversation with you, actually, I believe. I think I've got a reply to an email, so I will do that. But yes, you can absolutely access the training. A lot of our training is paid for. You have to pay for the training anyway. Obviously, we're a not-for-profit organisation. It's very, very cheap, but there is a cost. But that's fine. There's no limits on as to who can access the training. Generally, our training courses they have been online, obviously, for the last 3 years for understandable reasons, but we can offer them in person or online, whichever suits the organisation better. There is no preference from us. There's no difference in cost. It's all in. Fine. Well, if there are no further questions, then I will allow you all a quarter of an hour back in your busy days. If you do have questions, obviously, feel free to either put them in the chat after today. Yes, you can absolutely share the recording. It will be shared with you via, I believe you'll get sent a link directly to it, but we'll also put it on our website, so you can send people to the website and it'll be there, and that goes up almost immediately, much to our horror, because we know we hate being on screen, but it will be there and you will be able to access it and share it as far and as wide as you want. Absolutely. So hopefully it's been useful and that you do want to share it. So as I say, you can either contact Anna and I, or you can continue to put your questions in the chat, and it'll prompt us to have a look at them anyway. So we can respond to them outside the meeting if that's preferable. I'm going to stop the recording and say